Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we have an interesting submission story for you, sent in from Amber Kurtz. Amber and her family has been abducted. Amber has found implants in her body, and she has discovered various sinister signs that she has been possibly a victim of alien crossbreeding. But before we get into the main story, we have a very important message for all of you loyal fans out there, all of you subscribers. We love you guys. We really appreciate your enthusiasm, feedback, suggestions, submissions. We love that you want us to do more shows. We love that our show has become part of your day. And it's for these reasons that we want to give you more. What if we could guarantee you 4 or more episodes a month? What if we could do a live podcast with you once a month, where you guys could actually speak with us during the show and become part of the show, help us shape that episode? What if we could give you some actual shows, not podcasts, actual shows where Ryan and I went out into the field with a camera crew and got real footage of the paranormal? That's what we want to do, and that's what we wanted to do for quite some time. However, we always seem to hit that financial wall preventing it from happening. We have tried accepting donations, making shows more frequently in hopes that the extra ad revenue would be enough to fund our ideas, such as Google advertising and all these different things. But unfortunately, we are a long ways away from being able to turn Effed Up Stories into what we believe it can be. But we did find another possible way, and it's a decision that we do not make lightly. It's an option that we've actually left on the table for well over a year, and we've tried everything else first. But here we are. The option I am referring to is to offer both free and paid content.
Now, we initially thought about having a paid subscription, but we didn't want to force anything on anyone, especially our loyal fans that have been with us for years. We think having both free and paid content is definitely the lesser evil of the options that we have available to us. Nobody is locked into anything. Nobody has to buy anything. It's just an extra option and a necessary evil if we are going to build the show into something bigger. If you're a big fan of our free content and you feel that it isn't coming fast enough, you have the option of purchasing exclusive episodes at your convenience. It will help support us and help us make the show better. The exclusive content will sell for as low as $1 an episode, less than the price of a cup of coffee. And these videos will have no ads. You can purchase these podcasts from our channel here on YouTube. The purchases are actually made through YouTube, so you can feel safe and secure about the transaction.
To start things off, we have 4 new exclusive episodes for your convenience, all at $1 each. And this is the only way to get them. They are Curse of Death, The Wrath of Kelly. Episode 2, Time Travel, Highway into the Past. Exclusive Episode 3, Death by Ouija Board. And finally, exclusive Episode 4, A Haunted House, Ghost of Dogman. Now, with that said, we're going to go back to the story by Ambre Kurtz. If you want to read it on the official website, it's literally called Alien Abductions, Implants, and Crossbreeding. Okay. So this started when she was moving in with a relative. It was a very nice house. It was 2 stories, had a full basement. And, she described the basement more like a living room. It was like a second living room. It was a 4-bedroom house, and all the bedrooms were on the second floor. Ambre and her husband and her children, they all shared the, one room at the same time. And she recalls this specific night. She was trying to put her kids to bed, and they had been living there for about 2 months. Well, for whatever reason, her children were afraid to sleep. There was something about it. Yeah, they didn't want to go to bed. And, she made a point to mention that, this was not like them. They weren't allowed to watch scary movies. And they're just, really wasn't in their character. So she sat them on the bed, and she asked her son, who was now 4 years old, and, she asked him what was wrong. He was old enough to be able to communicate what was, what he was feeling. So she asks, what's wrong? And the son says, they will come and take us. So the mother asks, who? And then the son responds, the monsters. And then she asks, what monsters? There is no monsters. And then he says, the monsters in the window. So you can kind of, at this point, you're kind of thinking it's just, kids, So she asked, where do they come from? And this is interesting. He says, the sky. Well, she asks, why doesn't Monty and Baby bark? And if you're wondering, that's their dogs. And her son says, they don't see them. So she says, well, who do they take? And the kid says, me, Jessie, that's his sister and her daughter, and you, the mother. And so she asks him, well, where do they take us? And he says, the moon. And then she asks, well, what do they do to us? And the son says, they put me in jail and they give me toys. They aren't very nice. And then she says, well, are they mean to you? Why, if they're mean to you, why do they give you toys? It seems like they're being nice. And the son says, no, they aren't mean. Kind of gives a pause. He says, I don't like toys. So, this is a strange thing for a 4-year-old to say. It's very specific. The monsters come from the sky. And, he's describing an abduction. They take him, his sister, and their mother. They take them in the sky and they put him in some kind of containment cell and they give him toys to play with. Now, at this point, Ambre notes that her heart was racing, out of her chest. I guess she could sense, the genuineness to it, or just the oddity that, her child would be able to recount this. Keep in mind, he's only 4. Right.
Where would he got this kind of knowledge, right?
Exactly. And by her own admission, her children does not watch horror movies. They're not familiar with that stuff. And this is something that creeps at a lot of adults when they hear their children able to, tell these kinds of stories that are just too detailed that they shouldn't have the knowledge. This is something you hear a lot with kids who have apparently been, they can tell you they're the reincarnation of somebody who died, and they go and do all this research and find out that, yeah, he described this last guy's life to a T, right? But anyway, so she's freaking out at this point, she finds it hard to breathe, and she's just trying to crunch this in her head, why, how, this is just crazy. And, she never spoke about this kind of thing in front of her children. She really just doesn't understand where he got this from. And the conversation, continues, and she's just trying to put on a brave face and not let him see that she's, not let him see that she's afraid or what have you. So she goes back in on the conversation, and she says, well, what do they look like? And the son says, big eyes, and he kind of just trails off. He's just quiet after he says this. And she says, do their hands look like ours? And she gestures, showing her hands to her son. And he says, yes, but big. And he's silent again. So she asks, well, what color are they? And she got in brackets there. It's a dumb question because her son was still learning the colors, but she doesn't really know. But her son says blue, and he says, and big heads, and he gestures. He puts his hands up and kind of makes the shape of a big head. So the mother asks, or she says, I should say, well, it's time to go to sleep. You'll be okay, and I'm sure that they are nice if they give you toys, and they probably won't be back. I will kick their butts, okay? Typical parenting, the kind of thing you'd say to your kids. Because the parents, they see, or the kids see their parents, and, everybody kind of thinks that their parents can protect them anyway,
Yeah, well, when you're that young, you still think mom and dad are
superheroes. Exactly, yeah. Right? And she hasn't bragged. What else do you tell your child, right? And, she knows it's probably not the best answer, but it's the best thing she can come up with at the time. You know what? I applaud her because I really don't know what I would say in the same situation, right? I mean, she put on a brave...
Be pretty struck dumb.
Yeah, I mean,
4-year-old gives you an exact, description of an
abduction.
Step-by-step abduction, and then details his abductees.
And it sounded just like aliens. I mean, this is from a 4-year-old, and he's able to very intelligently, and again, it's not something that I think a 4-year-old could come up with on their own. It really does come across as genuine, and I think that's what scared her, right? And I mean, again, I applaud her for being able to put on a brave face and, get through this and comfort her son. So, her children go to sleep, and as she laid in bed and, she watches them doze off, keeping in mind they're all in the same room, right? She tells her husband, what had just happened. He explains this, she explains this exchange that they just had with their child, and he just shook his head and laughed, kids, right? And, this is the kind of thing I'm sure that all of you poor abducted kids out there have heard growing up. Your parents don't believe you. So that's the father here. I mean, you see it in every ghost show, right? It's like one parent's witnessing this stuff, and the other guy's like, kids, right? Anyway, so a few nights later, Ombre wakes up. She wakes up in the morning, and to her surprise... she has these 4 large nickel-shaped bruises spread oddly apart on her right thigh. Now, I'm not saying I've ever been abducted, but I've woke up with strange bruises. Ryan, have you ever experienced that?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there was a short period of time there. Well, about a year where I kept waking up with bruises and cuts, and a lot more cuts and bruises, right, actually. And, it almost became a joke that, it looks like they were here and got you again, my wife would say. I'm like, what do you mean? And there'd be a big cut on my back or something.
Yeah, I'd wake up with these weird bruises that just they kind of be in a weird shape, like a triangle somewhere or something like that. And I mean, that's what would be weird about it. In a weird spot and a weird kind of a pattern overnight. But anyway, I'm just mentioning that because I wondered the same thing when I'd have this. It's like, I don't suppose I was abducted last night, But anyway, so she wakes up. She has these 4 large nickel-shaped bruises spread oddly apart on her right thigh. Her first thought was that, she didn't do anything to get these bruises, and she would have remembered these for sure. So I guess they were pretty notable. On another occasion, she noticed that she had this hard object in her hand. It was very tender to the touch, and it was just between her pointed finger and her thumb, in that webbed area. She said it felt like a BB or like a pellet. Like if any of you have ever used a BB gun or a pellet gun, you can imagine when those little tiny BBs stuck in that webbed part of your hand. That's what she described it as. It would move freely, she said, as she would pinch it with her other fingers, with her left hand. So, she could really feel it in there. It was tender. Don't know how it got in there. She said that the BB-like thing was in there for about 5 months, but it gradually sunk deeper, and now it's gone. She doesn't know where it went, what happened to it, but it's not there. So there was these plenty of occasions in the 5-bedroom house that she would awake in the morning and feel as if, she had never slept, and her body would hurt. And this is, I guess, a notable part for me. She says her body would hurt, especially in my private parts. Now, keeping in mind, she's a woman, and while crossbreeding is a thing, many women have come out with that. But anyway, moving on. She would also have a triangular marking upon the top of her right foot. And she would say that, it looks like a series of tiny dots that make up the triangle that's, no bigger than a dime. And, on that note, the little marks
that's another common one, the triangle dots.
But that's what I was going to say. That's the kind of thing that I would wake up and see, like on my hand or something like that, would be like 3 dots in a triangle, and only a small one, right? Like, somewhere on the top of my hand is where I remember seeing it. So again, there's that interesting parallel. Doesn't make me feel particularly better about the idea that maybe it happened to me too. So anyway, she would wake up and she had these, triangular dots on her. And she said this is still on her foot today, and she has no recollection of where it came from. It just, it was just there one morning. Also lately, she's been, going to bed at very late hours and getting very little sleep. She said it's as if her body is afraid to go to sleep any earlier. And sometimes it's really hard to describe these things, but you kind of get a sense of what they're trying to say. So she said, and she even admits that, she said she knows it sounds stupid, but she just can't wrap her head around it. And I mean, you can imagine trying to explain this kind of a thing so that people who haven't experienced it can understand, because let's face it, the victims don't truly understand what's happening to them. She said the only time that, she gets her best sleep is during the day, and that's if her husband's available to watch over the children. She used to have these really intense dreams and stuff like that, and for the last 5 years, since this stuff has been happening, she feels like she hasn't had any dreams at all. So she's not getting any sleep, and she's waking up feeling as if she never slept at all, and she's not having any dreams. And she's got these weird marks on her body, and pain in her private parts. So she goes on to say on another note, because this is something that's always in the back of her head. Her son was born in 2008, and after he was born, she had an IUD implanted in her body. In brackets, she has Marina. So I guess this is Ryan. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
An IUD is a form of contraceptive.
Yes. Okay. Good. So I was right. That's what I was going to say. Anyway, so 2 months after she has this, IUD implanted into her body, that's when she conceived her daughter, which is odd. The whole point was to prevent that. She was born while the marina was still in her body, and she was born with, she described it as beautiful blonde hair and blue eyes. And she said that her and her husband all have natural brown hair and hazel brown eyes. Now, I will say that a lot of times genetics, they skip a generation. They come from your grandparents oftentimes. Now, I don't know how you want to.
Well,
look
there's
at it
there's a thing in, if you do any kind of genetics, there's the common pundit square, I think is called, and it's basically 1 in every 4 children on average are the outlier.
Yeah.
And they can exhibit traits. I did know a girl who was tall, thin, fair-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes, and all of her siblings and her mother and her father all were short with darker skin, dark eyes, and dark hair.
Perhaps she was brought by the stork.
Perhaps.
So
perhaps the stork has big black eyes and large hands.
Yeah, yeah. So now the interesting thing the point here is that so she has this child while she has the marina in, but she kept it in for the 5 years since she first had it in. So she has the kid, she keeps it in for 5 years, and it was proven effective during the rest of the time. She did not conceive another child, but she said, and this is something that you women will be able to, I guess, relate to. She said that there's many occasions where she felt pregnant. And I will say that, the women in my life, when they say they feel like that, before ever doing a test, they always are. It's like they can feel it. So even though I'm not a woman and I can't personally say I know what she's speaking of, I'm sure that you women can relate and understand what she's saying. She said that she even felt something move inside of her. She could feel it with her hand. Put her hand on her stomach, and she could feel it move. But it always seems to have subsided. It just would go away. And she said that she does recall having maybe 2 or 3 dreams in that time frame, which she saw herself pregnant. She never saw the actual child, but is this a case of because she felt pregnant, she's thinking about it and dreaming about it, or
is it the subconscious trying to send a message?
Exactly. Maybe she actually was pregnant, because this is where it all gets to where we start drawing ideas. She says this sounds crazy, and she wouldn't. She's just like the typical victim of abductions. She's afraid that no one's going to believe her, and it's going to sound crazy, but to me it really does. She's saying this as plainly as she can, and you can tell that she's struggling with what has happened.
And it doesn't seem to be like there's a pile of embellishment either. No, she's very to the point.
She's very to the point. She said, her husband doesn't believe the story, and she's only told her, her best friend, and anyone else that she's told thinks she's nuts. She's thankful for having been able to just, I guess, get it off her chest. If I were to weigh in and just like kind of summarize what happened here and what I think. You have this woman who, by all accounts, it sounds like her son, has been able to. A lot of people who get abducted, they never be able to. They can never tell you what happened. At least initially, a lot of people, they might remember missing time, maybe a couple strange events, but for the most part, the whole experience seems to have disappeared from their mind. It's only in the later years when their memories start to come back to them, perhaps triggered by something that they see or hear, something they read, and all of a sudden these things start to click, and all of a sudden it's coming back. And other people go to hypnotic regression, and because of these little things that come back to them, and they're worried of what they're going to find out. And I mean, Ryan, even for your story out in the bog, you yourself said that, this missing time and stuff that you experienced, or I should say the fact that you may have just as well disappeared because your uncle couldn't see you guys and didn't believe your story and knew where you were, went out looking for you.
Well, that's, like we were younger, so the only reason they let us go there and spend the night was because they, knew that we knew the area and that they knew exactly where we were going to go because there was absolutely nowhere else to be.
Exactly.
So,
and
I guess missing time would be wrong. It's
more like you disappeared.
I was just missing.
Yeah, and I mean, by your own admission, I mean, you and your cousin experienced this thing, and you guys don't speak of it the next day. I mean, you go all these years, you don't even speak of it. And this is so common with, people who are abducted. And, here we have similar things happening here. I mean, she doesn't want to tell the story. She's afraid people are going to think she's crazy.
It would make sense that if they were able to, erase memory, that, perhaps they also have the ability to insert some kind of a block, like it's something that's in there that kind of steers you away from it. It's not a hard wall, right? Because I think that would, a hard wall would show that there's some kind of a problem. But if you're able to divert the mind kind of to the side of it, because even even my experience, if that's indeed what happened, I really don't know. I don't claim to be an abductee, but if that's what happened, then they did a great job because both my cousin and I are very open-minded people. Obviously, for me, but we're both very open-minded people. Yet neither of us chooses to really broach the topic with one another. Even when I spoke to him recently about him writing up his version of the tale, we didn't even discuss it then. I just told him I look forward to seeing what he had put to paper, and I can certainly, if that's the case, I can certainly understand where the problems come in, and the whole abduction phenomenon, and especially the hybridization, program as it's put, it just I find it such a fascinating one because it's obviously something that's being done with a particular, a definite scientific interest, but there has to be a particular goal if there's a hybridization. And I mean, there's very little in the UFO phenomena that lends itself to why. We get all these, okay, they're from outer space or they're from another dimension. They fly spaceships. They're really smart. We're pretty sure they're telepathic. They have crazy technology, but we never get anything in the lore or in the experiences as to ask or answer the question, why are they doing this? And the hybridization issue, the thing that's so unique, I think, about that is that it at the very least, it gives us a little window into their policies dealing with us, a little bit into their mindset, I guess. That obviously there has to be some sort of a program, which would mean that there's some kind of a plan, which means that somehow we're part of something that they're doing.
Yeah, and and there's lots of different theories that maybe they their race is dying and they can't procreate with one another, or like I've heard all these different kinds of reasons why they would.
A slow invasion force.
Yeah, but I mean the interesting thing in terms of Ambre's story is that while she couldn't remember these things, I mean she would wake up with obvious markings on herself and pain or in certain areas, and I mean even her hand seemed to have had some kind of an implant, which again is a common thing. I mean it's just like that story we did with Elta and Chad. She had a implant. I can't remember if it was in her hand or her arm, but again, like when she would try to go after it. She could feel it, but it would kind of retract itself deeper into her body.
And I'm pretty sure there's a pretty famous implant removal story, I think, that was done on Coast to Coast,
Yeah,
where as they were attempting the surgery, the implant was, like the doctor who was doing it, who was just a doctor, not in any way, shape, or form associated with anything. Maybe that was all. That was, I think that was part of Chad Nalta's story, wasn't it?
yeah, probably was.
I might be getting my wires crossed there between stories, but in either case, there are examples of these things having some ability to locomote through the body.
Yeah, and so while the mother, Ambre, she can't remember the specifics. Her son could. Her son very clearly was able to recant what sounded very obviously like a story of abduction between him, his sister, and his mother. Now, I find it interesting that the father wasn't involved.
Well, and you know what? That lends itself to some interesting things as well, because we often see the abduction phenomenon, becoming a generational thing. That is definitely a theme that has gained a lot of popularity over the years. But more so, it really puts me in mind of, the all the early peoples, you always inherit it more from your mother than your father. And that's become an embedded tradition, all through early cultures, and on up into large modern religions today still hold. If you have two parents that are, one's Christian and one's Jewish, and your mom's Jewish and your dad's Christian, if you're born, you're considered, a born native Jew to the rest of the people, right? Or to the Jewish community. And that's a cultural thing that harkens way back to, the succession rights between the gods, when things can get very muddled in Sumerian and Babylonian gods, as they're marrying their sisters and half sisters, and succession becomes a very sticky thing, and it always follows the mother's bloodline. And it's interesting. It was only recently that we discovered that while we get half of our DNA from our mother and half from our father, we get 100% of our mitochondrial DNA from our mother. And the mitochondria being the little power, little organisms that they use, in ancient times. They were, like ancient Earth, beyond ancient, like before people. Mitochondria were separate organisms, and now they symbiotically live inside of all of our cells and produce power for our cells. And we get 100% of our mitochondrial DNA, which is separate from the rest of our cellular DNA, from our mother. So we are all more part of our mothers than we are our fathers, just in that way anyway.
So maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe it is a generational thing, and that's why it was just the son and the daughter. Of course, the son and the daughter is going to be carrying that same DNA from the mother. That would make sense within that theory. So we have that, but again, the son is able to really explain, what a 4-year-old should not be able to explain, and at the same time, the mother has these markings, and these, basically signs of physical trauma that we associate with abductees. And, she has 5 years where she can't, she feels like she can't sleep. She doesn't dream. And she also has this, form of birth control implanted into her. It's a chip, or a marina, whatever I'm not really familiar with it, but whatever.
I think it's like a little T-shaped object that's placed, I think it's placed in the cervix, and it prevents an egg from taking root.
Okay. Well, whatever the case is, she does have her daughter, miraculously with this thing, but it does do its job for the next 5 years, and yet, she has these distinct, occasions where she feels pregnant, and this is something that again, like women can really, they can sense. And I'm not trying to say this like tell women what they feel. I guess I'm referring to the women that I know, and they have been very correct when they have thought that, and so I mean, that to me, I can't help but wonder. Maybe she has been pregnant many times, and I mean,
well, even to the point where she said she could actually feel something.
yeah. So I mean,
that's pretty significant.
Is she being abducted and having the as for the privates hurting? Maybe it's being abducted and the aliens basically taking the baby out of her. Maybe it doesn't need to be fully grown. It can, at an earlier stage, maybe they have some kind of a chamber that they can put the unfinished growing fetus into to finish doing what it is. Maybe it's different because it's half human, half alien. I really, it's only speculation that I can give.
And I think it bears mentioning, only because it is another theory that over the last decade or so has gained quite a bit of traction, which is the idea that these type of abductions are actually being performed by people who are using, and very advanced technology to implant false memory, to project holograms, this, that, and the other thing, to completely throw people, to really capitalize on the whole UFO thing.
Now, why would they do that?
Well, that's, and that's always been my question. I've never really ascribed to that myself, but I wouldn't say that it's impossible. I mean, if we're looking at shadowy, extra governmental groups who have access to, let's say, extraterrestrial technology, I don't think it lessens the experience in any way. I think if anything, it bears even more questions. Is like, where in the hell did they get this technology? How far ahead are they really? And they could still be creating hybrids for all we know. But like you say, what would be the point of basically farming babies from the population? And I mean, it's a scary thought, but if you really consider it, the idea of doing something like that would be abhorrent enough, would be terrible enough to say, all right, guys, we got to come up with a really slick scheme to get away with this. We can't have anybody remembering people in suits with government badges. We really got to make them seem crazy so that any evidence they try to bring to the table is tainted by the fact that they're claiming aliens.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the only way that it makes sense to me, that the idea that one of the tricks that and when I say they, will just blanket statement the powers that be, even though I don't personally believe they're unified, I do believe there are powers that be, people with enough technology to seem like gods to us. But it would stand to reason that if they're, doing something like this, then they definitely want to hide it in the. And I guess the point I was getting at was, one of the tricks supposedly that is used is that you want to keep the gulf, the space between the truth behind what's happening and what you make everybody believe is actually happening. You want to keep that space so wide, you want to keep that gulf so open that if anybody ever glimpses the truth, even for a second, no matter how open-minded you are, if you glimpse that truth for a second, it would be so paradigm shattering that you would turn away from it, because it would literally, the knowledge of that would be literally disintegrating your whole worldview. If you suddenly became aware that half of the world is populated with these horrible monsters who are doing terrible, horrible, monstrous things to the population, I don't think you'd live very comfortably for the rest of your life.
No.
And I think the idea is to keep keep them thinking it's this thing, so that even the ones who want to believe in the wild theories, we'll give them the wild theories to believe in, because if they ever knew what it really was, oh boy, they'd be mad. So we'll make up a whole story about space aliens, because that's better than what we're actually doing, and it's one of those, misdirection things. How, the CIA came out recently and said, oh yeah, all through the 50s and 60s or something like that, 60s or 70s, it was a 2-decade period. They used the UFO phenomenon as a cloak for their, for their spy planes, right? So whenever they were flying a spy plane over Russia somewhere, they would have 5 or 6 people phone in and say, oh, I see a UFO, I see a UFO. And until they got everybody, quote unquote, seeing UFOs. And then every time somebody spotted a spy plane, it was just a UFO and not a spy plane, right?
Yeah, well, it is smart, really.
It's a great piece of double think, or propaganda, disinformation. You get a whole population thinking they're looking at something wondrous, when it's America was Russia's enemy at the time, and they're looking up at the sky at their enemy and seeing
UFOs.
something mystical and mysterious, right?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this. I mean, but I think one thing that we can all agree on is that whatever they're doing, it's not going to be a positive thing. I don't have any delusions that the people being abducted are being abducted for a good cause for us.
Yeah. And you know what, everyone out there, while there are indeed crazy people in the world who will make up crazy stories and tell you crazy, untrue things, I don't think that anybody who is, legitimately disturbed by something should feel so terrified to talk to, their peers and their family, because of fear of being denigrated or being branded a lunatic. I think it's the worst thing in the world to call somebody crazy because you don't believe what they're saying. You don't have to believe it, right? But people, there's so little support for people who legitimately have had something otherworldly and bizarre happen to them in this way. And I think it bears mentioning that it's important not to be too incredulous and to be too badgering.
Well,
because obviously this woman felt the need to say, she says it several times, you're going to think this sounds crazy. You're going to think I'm crazy, but,
Well, fortunately for her, and Ombre, if you're listening, that is very, very common to almost every abductee that I've spoken to. I kind of like to think of the group of you guys that have, sent me your stories. In this case, it's misery loves company. We're all kind of this one giant group. And even though we haven't had all the same experiences, we do share a lot of, definitely strange experiences. And this could be, I think of this group as, a group of people who can openly share these stories and ideas, and not be ridiculed and not be, can actually be taken seriously. That is one thing that I am happy to say that I do think Effed Up Story does provide, is a platform for people to share their stories, without ridicule, for people who actually want to listen and give legitimate opinions and feedback.
I'm always very proud when we are contacted by somebody who says, you know what, I don't need to tell you guys my story other than to say that I've had this kind of exact thing happen to me before. Here's my email. Give it to the person whose story this was, or who did this interview, and tell them that if they ever needed somebody to talk to, we've had that several times.
Oh yeah, we have. I mean, there's lots of good Samaritans out there that have contacted us and even offered to help some of our guests who we've had on shows. who have been troubled by, their experiences. And I mean, Ryan, you and I will, we do what we can, but I mean, the truth is, I mean, we're not expertise in certain fields, like we're not demonologists and we're not, but I mean, if there's anyone that we can put you into contact with who we might know, we do that. And of course, we do provide an ear to listen and a platform to have your story heard should you feel the need to. So again, just like everybody who shares their story, I mean, we really do appreciate it. And we do hope that those of you listening, particularly who have had your own experiences with, UFOs, abductions, aliens, actually anything that, it was traumatic in the paranormal realm, we do hope that, these stories are of some comfort, that you're not alone. You're not the only one out there. As they say, misery loves company. And ironically, there are a lot of us who have had these strange experiences. So with that said, thank you, Ombre, for your story. If there's any of you out there who have your own effed up story, on the paranormal, ghosts, demonic possession, I mean, we really do cover it all. We would love to hear it. You can send that to us. Just click the little annotation on our video that says click here to submit. Fill out the form, submit it. We'll put it on the website. It'll possibly get in a podcast. And, of course, we really do look forward to reading it. And if you just want to browse the content on the website, you can visit us at effedupstories.com. That's effedupstories.com. And we hope to catch you next time. We got lots of new content coming. And the more that you send in, the more content we'll have. So thanks for listening, everybody. This is Will Pender saying I will catch you next time.
Have a great night, everybody.
The show. And become part of the show. Help us shape that episode. What if we could give you some actual shows, not podcasts, actual shows where Ryan and I went out into the field with a camera crew and got real footage of the paranormal? That's what we want to do, and that's what we wanted to do for quite some time. However, we always seem to hit that financial wall preventing it from happening. We have tried accepting donations, making shows more frequently in hopes that the extra ad revenue would be enough to fund our ideas such as Google advertising and all these different things. But unfortunately, we are a long ways away from being able to turn effed up stories into what we believe it can.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
But we did find another possible way, and it's a decision that we do not make lightly. It's an option that we've actually left on the table for well over a year, and we've tried everything else first. But here we are. The option I am referring to is to offer both free and paid content.
Now, we initially thought about having a paid subscription, but we didn't want to force anything on anyone, especially our loyal fans that have been with us for years. We think having both free and paid content is definitely the lesser evil of the options that we have available to us. Nobody is locked into anything. Nobody has to buy anything. It's just an extra option and a necessary evil if we are going to build the show into something bigger.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we have an interesting submission story for you sent in from Amber Kurtz. Amber and her family has been abducted. Amber has found implants in her body, and she has discovered various sinister signs that she has been possibly a victim of alien crossbreeding. But before we get into the main story, we have a very important message for all of you loyal fans out there, all of you subscribers. We love you guys. We really appreciate your enthusiasm, feedback, suggestions, submissions. We love that you want us to do more shows. We love that our show has become part of your day. And it's for these reasons that we want to give you more. What if we could guarantee you 4 or more episodes a month? What if we could do a live podcast with you once a month where you guys could actually speak with us during